Helen stood in front of a massive antique mirror in a wedding dress that cost a fortune. But on her, it looked more like a burial shroud. Only one thought was pounding in her head, pulsating like an open wound. I wish I were dead. God, just let me disappear right now. She is only 23 years old, an incredibly talented violinist who was predicted to play on world stages. And today, she is marrying a man the whole town whispers about, calling him the Ghost. He is 85 years old. His face is a mask of horror hidden beneath bandages, and his reputation is even darker than the blackest night. But what happens next? Guys, this plot twist is going to make you drop your phone. You will not believe who this old man turned out to be and what game he is actually playing. Seriously, brace yourselves, because this story will make your blood run cold. But before we dive into this madness right now, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss the ending of this drama. Are you ready? Let's go. Let's rewind the tape 2 weeks. The atmosphere in Helen's life was, to put it mildly, suffocating. She lived in a tiny, shabby apartment on the outskirts of the city with her stepfather, Gary. And if you think evil stepmothers only exist in fairy tales, you just haven't met Gary. This man was a walking disaster, a gambler, a loser, and the kind of guy who is always looking for an easy score, but only finds new problems. Gary had lost everything. First their house, then the car, and finally, all of Helen's late mother's savings, which she had been setting aside for her daughter's conservatory education. That evening, Helen was standing by the window, pressing her only valuable possession, her violin, to her shoulder. The bow flew across the strings, tearing furious and sorrowful sounds of a Paganini caprice from the instrument. The music was her only shield against reality. The door burst open with a crash. Gary stumbled into the room. As always, he reeked of cheap tobacco and stale booze, but his eyes were shining feverishly. "Helen, baby," he barked, not even trying to shout over the music. "I have amazing news. You won't believe it. I found a way to clear all our debts. Every single cent." Helen slowly lowered her violin, feeling her stomach knot with a bad premonition. "Did you get a job?" she asked with a hope that wasn't really there. "Better," Gary grinned, revealing yellow, rotting teeth. "I found you a husband." Silence hung in the room, broken only by the ticking of a cheap clock on the wall. "What?" Helen thought she had misheard. "Gary, are you drunk?" "What husband? It's the 21st century. You can't just find me a husband." "Oh, I definitely can, if that husband is Arthur Sterling, the billionaire, the owner of those skyscrapers downtown. He needs a nurse. I mean, a wife, an official wife. And he is willing to pay $500,000 in cash to whoever gives him their daughter." Helen gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Arthur Sterling. The name was a legend, but a dark and frightening one. There were terrible rumors about him. They said he was disfigured in a horrific fire or chemical accident years ago, that he never left his mansion on the hill, that he looked like a real monster, and the few who had seen him lost the power of speech from terror. "No," Helen said firmly, clutching the violin to her chest. "Absolutely not. I am not marrying an old man for your debts. That is insanity." Gary's face instantly changed. The smile vanished, replaced by a vicious grimace. He stepped toward her, and Helen pressed herself against the windowsill. Then, "Pack your bags, princess," he hissed, "because the debt collectors are coming tomorrow morning. And they won't be polite. They won't just take the furniture and the TV. They will take your violin." Helen flinched. The violin. It was the only thing she had left of her mom. It was her soul, her voice, her future. And if the violin isn't enough for them, Gary continued to pressure her, seeing her fear, they might take you as payment. You know who I work for. These people don't joke around. Is that what you want? Do you want to end up in some underground brothel? Helen looked at the polished wood of the instrument. Images flashed through her mind. The rough hands of collectors snapping the violin's neck, or worse, her own broken life. Tears froze in her eyes, never falling. I'll do it, she whispered, feeling something inside her break with a dry crack. The wedding day felt like her own funeral. There was no white limousine, no flowers, no bridesmaids. Gary drove her to the gates of a massive Gothic mansion that looked more like a crypt than a home. The ceremony took place in a huge, gloomy hall. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out every ray of sun. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and medicine. There were no guests, just a trembling notary, a priest who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, and Gary. Her stepfather was already rubbing his sweaty palms, looking around greedily in anticipation of the check. And then he appeared. When the elevator doors at the far end of the hall opened, Helen almost fainted. Arthur Sterling rolled up to the altar in a wheelchair. It was a sight not for the faint of heart. His face was completely hidden under thick layers of medical bandages, leaving only narrow slits for eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The only patch of skin visible was his chin flabby, covered in liver spots and old stubble. He wheezed. Every breath came with a struggle, with a terrible whistling sound, like the bellows of an old accordion. His hands, resting on the armrests, shook with a fine tremor. The skin on them was dry, like parchment, resembling dead tree branches in winter. God, Helen thought. I'm marrying a mummy, a living corpse. Do you take? The priest mumbled, trying not to look at the groom. The silence in the hall was deafening. I do, Arthur rasped. That voice. It sounded like someone scraping rusty metal against glass. A cold, mechanical, dead voice. A shiver ran down Helen's spine. I do, Helen choked out. The words stuck in her throat like a lump. She tried not to look at Gary, who was brazenly winking at her from the corner, his hand already on his jacket pocket. As soon as the ceremony ended and the signatures were dry, the notary handed Gary a heavy briefcase. Her stepfather didn't even approach Helen to hug her or say goodbye. He grabbed the money, cast one last triumphant look at her, and vanished like smoke. Helen was left alone, in a huge, empty house, with a man-monster. Come, Arthur rasped. His trembling hand, looking like a clawed paw, pointed toward the elevator. Helen recoiled. The wedding night, the worst nightmare for any girl in her situation. Her imagination, ruthless and vivid, began to paint horrific pictures. She imagined those cold, dry hands touching her skin, that wheeze sounding right in her ear. Nausea rose to her throat. They entered the elevator. The ride to the second floor felt like an eternity. Helen pressed herself against the cabin wall, afraid to even breathe, lest she attract his attention. Arthur sat motionless, only his heavy, whistling breathing filling the cramped space. The doors opened. They were in a long corridor lined with expensive carpets. Arthur rolled his chair to the door of a luxurious bedroom. "This is your room," he said, and his words were interrupted by a coughing fit. "Bathroom is on the right. Wardrobe is full of clothes your size. My apartments are in the other wing." He paused, and Helen froze, expecting the worst. "I don't bother you. You don't bother me," he continued in an icy tone. "That is the only rule. Dinner is at 7 sharp. Don't be late." And that was it. He turned his chair and rolled away. Just rolled away into the darkness of the corridor, accompanied by the creaking of wheels and his own wheezing. Helen stood in the middle of the room, stunned. He didn't touch her? He didn't even try? No lewd hints, no demands of marital duty. She went into the room, locked the door with trembling hands, using every lock she could find, and slid down the wall to the floor. The dress enveloped her like a fluffy cloud as she buried her face in her knees and sobbed. She had sold her life, her youth, her future to cover her stepfather's debts. Now she was a prisoner in this golden crypt, the wife of a man she feared to death. But sobbing on the floor of this luxurious bedroom, Helen didn't know one thing. She didn't know that this old man in the wheelchair, wrapped in bandages, was hiding a secret worth far more than $500,000. She didn't even suspect that she had just become part of a plan that would turn her life upside down. For the first week, the mansion felt less like a prison and more like a 5-star hotel, where you are the only guest and the staff has taken a vow of silence. Helen barely saw her husband. The house was massive, a labyrinth of mahogany and velvet. The servants moved like shadows. They were polite, efficient, but completely mute. Yet every morning, without fail, a silver cart was rolled into her room. Breakfast fit for a queen, exotic fruits, fresh pastries, expensive coffee, and always a vase of fresh white roses. No note, just the flowers. Helen spent her days wandering the empty corridors, waiting for something. Abuse, demands, cruelty, but there was nothing, just silence. On the 7th day, the isolation became too loud. Helen gathered her courage, took a deep breath, and went down to the west wing, pushing open the heavy oak doors of the library. It was a magnificent room, smelling of old leather and dust. And there he was, Arthur. He sat by the fireplace, his wheelchair looking like a throne made of medical equipment. He was reading a book through a huge, thick magnifying glass. His hunched figure, wrapped in a heavy dressing gown, looked pathetic, frail. Helen stood in the doorway, about to turn back, when he spoke. "Do you play?" He didn't turn around. He didn't even lift his head. Helen flinched, her hand gripping the doorframe. "What?" "I heard you're a violinist," Arthur rasped, turning a page with a trembling hand. "Why don't I hear music in this house? Are the walls too thick? Or did you bury your talent along with your freedom?" The words stung. They were sharp, calculated. Helen felt a flash of anger. This man, who had bought her like a piece of furniture, had the audacity to criticize her silence. "I don't play for those who bought me," she replied cheekily, surprised by her own boldness. Arthur turned his chair slowly. The mechanism whirred in the quiet room. Those invisible eyes watched her from behind the pitch-black glasses. The bandages covering his face seemed to absorb the light. "I didn't buy you, child," he said, his voice sounding like dry leaves being crushed. "I made a deal. There is a difference. And music. Music shouldn't be silent because of human stupidity. There's a Steinway in the corner. If you want, you can accompany the creaking floorboards, but I'd prefer Bach." In his voice, despite the terrible rasp and the wheezing, there was a strange irony, an intelligence that didn't fit the image of a senile, dying man. Helen stood there for a moment, weighing her options. Then, not knowing exactly why, maybe to prove him wrong, maybe just to feel alive again, she turned and ran upstairs to get her violin. She returned, stood in the center of the library, and placed the violin under her chin. She started to play. At first, the notes were uncertain, shaky. But then, Passion took over. She closed her eyes. She played not for him, but for herself. She poured everything into the melody: the betrayal of her stepfather, the loss of her mother, the fear of the future, the loneliness of this golden cage. The bow slashed across the strings, screaming her pain. When she finished, breathing heavily, absolute silence hung in the room. The fire crackled in the hearth. "You rushed the third measure," Arthur creaked. Helen blinked, deflating slightly. "But," he continued, leaning back in his chair, the emotions were honest. It has been a long time since I heard something honest." Helen smiled. A small, genuine smile. For the first time in 2 weeks. "You know music?" she asked, lowering her bow. "I've had a lot of time to listen," he answered evasively, turning back to the fire. "Play something else. Something angry." From that day on, they had a ritual. Every evening after dinner, Helen went to the library. She played. Arthur listened. And then the strangest thing happened. They started talking. It turned out this decrepit old man wasn't just a mummy in a wheelchair. He had a razor-sharp mind, encyclopedic knowledge, and a sarcastic, dry sense of humor that actually made Helen laugh. He wasn't like the old men she knew from her neighborhood. He didn't talk about the weather or his pills. He understood modern trends. He knew everything about the stock market. He understood how blockchain worked. He even quoted a line from a movie that had come out just last year. "For a recluse who never leaves the house, you're surprisingly well informed about the world," Helen remarked one evening at dinner, swirling the wine in her glass. Arthur chuckled, a dry, hacking sound. "The internet is a great thing, Helen," he said. He reached for his glass of water, and that's when Helen saw it. For a split second, literally a blink of an eye, the hand that was reaching for the glass stopped shaking. It was steady, firm, strong. But the moment Helen's eyes widened, the hand began to tremble violently again, spilling a few drops of water on the tablecloth. "Damn Parkinson's," Arthur muttered, gripping the glass with 2 hands to lift it. Helen looked at him closely. Was it her imagination? Or was it a glitch in the matrix? A few days later, the atmosphere in the house changed. The estate manager, Mr. Thorne, came to visit. Helen disliked him immediately. He was a slick, arrogant man in a cheap suit who looked at the mansion as if he was already calculating its auction value. They were in the living room. Thorne was loudly discussing finances, pacing back and forth, while Arthur sat silently in his chair. "Look, we need to liquidate the assets in the South," Thorne said, not even bothering to look at his boss. Then he laughed, a nasty, condescending sound. "So, old-timer, are you signing this? Or has your hand withered off completely? Maybe I should guide the pen for you." He reached out to pat Arthur on the shoulder, a gesture of total disrespect. Something snapped inside Helen. She felt a surge of rage boiling inside her chest. Before she realized what she was doing, she stepped between Thorne and her husband's chair. "Watch your mouth," she hissed, her eyes flashing. Thorne froze, his hand in midair. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Helen stood tall, shielding the helpless old man. "This man pays your salary. He built this empire while you were still in diapers, and he has more dignity in his pinky finger than you have in your entire body. Get out. Get out now, or I will call security." Thorne was taken aback. He looked at Helen, then at the silent figure in the wheelchair. He mumbled an apology, grabbed his papers, and hastily retreated. The front door slammed shut. Helen turned to Arthur, her heart pounding. She was breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She expected him to be upset or embarrassed. "Thank you," he said quietly. Helen froze. That voice. It wasn't the metallic scrape of a dying man. It was deeper, richer, resonant. It sounded young. For that one brief second, the wheeze was gone. "Arthur?" Helen stepped toward him, confusion washing over her. "Are you okay? Your voice—" Arthur suddenly hunched over, coughing violently. His whole body shook with the effort. "Yes. Yes," he wheezed, the rasp returning worse than before. "Just the medication. It affects the throat. Go to sleep, Helen. I need rest." He rolled his chair away quickly, retreating into the shadows of his wing before she could ask another question. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her huge bed. She kept thinking about Arthur, about how calm she felt around him, about how his deformity had stopped scaring her, about how she had defended him today. Was she starting to feel sympathy? Friendship? No, that's impossible. He's 3 times her age. He's her buyer. But that hand stopped shaking. That voice that sounded so strong for a fleeting second. Thirst drove her out of bed at 2 a.m. She put on her silk robe and went into the hallway to get some water from the kitchen. The house was dark and silent, but as she walked past the corridor leading to Arthur's private study, she saw a strip of light under the door. He was awake. Helen slowed down, not wanting to disturb him. But then she heard a voice. She stopped dead in her tracks. It was a male voice coming from the study. But it wasn't the estate manager. It wasn't a servant. It was a strong, energetic baritone voice. Powerful, commanding. The person was talking on the phone. "Yes, the stocks are up," the voice said, sharp and clear. "Sell everything Gary owns. I want that scumbag left with absolutely nothing. He sold his daughter, now let him pay the price. Yes, she's amazing. She's stronger than I thought. No, I can't tell her yet. It's too dangerous. Not yet." Helen's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. That wasn't the voice of an 85-year-old man. That was the voice of a young man. A man in his prime. And he was talking about her. He was talking about Gary. Who was in there with him? Helen thought frantically. Is Arthur holding someone hostage, or... A terrifying, impossible realization began to dawn on her. She took a trembling step toward the door. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the cold brass handle. "I have to know," she whispered to herself. She pushed the door open. Helen burst into the office and froze. The wheelchair was empty. Standing in the middle of the room was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with an athletic build, tight in a black t-shirt. He stood with his back to her, looking out the window. He had thick, dark hair, no gray at all. "Arthur?" whispered Helen. The man turned sharply. Helen gasped. On the desk lay a wig with gray hair, prosthetics mimicking sagging neck skin, and those creepy glasses. Standing before her was an incredibly handsome man in his 30s. There was only one small scar above his eyebrow, which only added to his masculinity. No burns, no deformities. "Helen." His voice was that same deep velvet tone she had heard a minute ago. "I can explain." "Explain?" Helen backed away, feeling anger mixed with shock. You're young. You're healthy. You've been lying to me this whole time." "Helen, please listen." "Who are you? Where is the real Arthur Sterling? Did you kill him?" "I am Arthur Sterling." He stepped toward her, but she put her hand out. "Don't come near me. You played with me. I was emptying bedpans. I mean, I pitied you. I defended you. And you were just laughing at me?" "I never laughed." Arthur looked desperate. "It was necessary." Arthur collapsed into a chair, a normal office chair, and covered his face with his hands. 3 years ago, I almost died. Not from a disease. I was poisoned by my ex-fiancée, Veronica, and my own brother. They wanted control of the Sterling Empire. I survived by a miracle, but I realized one thing. Everyone only wants my money and my name. He looked up at Helen, his eyes full of pain. I created this persona. Old, sick, dying. It was my only shield against those who wanted me dead. And then, I heard about your stepfather's debt. He looked up at Helen, his eyes full of sincerity. I knew Gary would sell you to anyone to save his own skin. It could have been a cartel. It could have been worse. I bought his debt to save you from that fate. The mask. It was just a precaution. I didn't know if I could trust you yet. I didn't know if you were a victim or an accomplice. Helen looked at him, stunned. You did it to protect me. At first, I told myself it was just a transaction, Arthur admitted, stepping closer. But then, Helen, you played the violin for me. You talked to me. You defended me from Thorn, even though you thought I was a helpless wreck. You fell in love with my soul when you thought my body was destroyed. That is what I have dreamed of my whole life. Helen listened to him, and her heart was breaking. She was angry about the lie, but she understood his motives. And most importantly, she realized that the person she laughed with in the library hadn't gone anywhere. He was standing right in front of her, only now he was also devastatingly attractive. "I want a divorce," she said, testing his reaction. "I'll give it to you if you want." Arthur lowered his head. "And you'll get the money. But I ask you, give me a chance. One date, a real one, no masks." Before Helen could answer, the sound of shattering glass and a siren wailing came from downstairs. Arthur changed instantly. The apologetic look vanished, replaced by the gaze of a predator. He ran to the security monitors. "Damn it," he cursed. "It's your stepfather, and he's not alone." On the screen, Gary, accompanied by 2 thugs, was trying to break down the gates. "What does he want?" Helen was terrified. "You gave him $500,000. It's not enough for him. Gamblers never stop. He came to blackmail us. If the press finds out I bought a wife, the company stocks will crash. He thinks he has me by the throat." Gary was screaming into the intercom. "Hey, Sterling, open up, you old freak. I know you're in there. Pay me another $1 million, or I'll tell everyone you're a pervert holding my daughter hostage. I already have a reporter from the Yellow Gazette on speed dial." Arthur turned to Helen. "We have 2 options. We can call the police, but there will still be a scandal. Or we can go out to him, together." "But he'll see you're young," Helen exclaimed. Arthur smiled. It was a dangerous but beautiful smile. "Exactly. We're going to put on a show they'll never forget. Are you with me?" Helen looked at him. She was still reeling from the shock, and the anger hadn't fully faded. But outside was the man who had truly ruined her life. She straightened her back and looked Arthur in the eye. "I'm with you," she said firmly. Then she pointed a finger at his chest. "But don't think you're off the hook, Sterling. We are going to have a very long conversation about your lies later. Right now, let's deal with Gary." The mansion gates opened. Gary, confident in his victory, stepped into the courtyard with his 2 goons and a hired stringer with a camera. "Come out, you old wreck," Gary yelled. "I know you can hear me. Helen, baby, Daddy's here to save you, for a small commission." The mansion doors swung open. But an invalid didn't roll out. Helen walked out, in a stunning red dress. She was holding the arm of a tall, statuesque man in an impeccable tuxedo. He walked with the confident stride of a man who owns the world. Gary blinked. Who is this? Where's Sterling? Helen, what guy did you bring out? Are you cheating on your husband? Oh, this is great. This is worth even more money. Film it, he shouted to the cameraman. Arthur and Helen approached. Hello, Gary, Arthur said in his real voice. Gary's eyes bugged out. That voice. Who are you? A security guard. I am Arthur Sterling, your son-in-law, and, unfortunately, the man to whom you owe a lot of money. Bullshit. Sterling is a decrepit old man. Everyone knows that. People believe what they want to believe, Arthur chuckled. I wore a mask to protect myself from parasites like you. But now, I have nothing to hide. Gary panicked. His plan was crumbling. This is fraud, he squealed. I'll tell everyone. You tricked me. Tricked? Helen intervened. You sold me, Gary. You thought you were condemning me to a life as a nurse for a dying man. Instead, you gave me into the hands of a man who loves me and whom I love. You little brat. Gary swung his hand to hit Helen. That was a mistake. Arthur intercepted Gary's hand in midair. The movement was lightning fast. A crack, and Gary howled in pain, falling to his knees. Don't you dare touch my wife. Arthur growled. Gary's thugs twitched to help, but immediately froze. Emerging from the shadows of the garden were Sterling's security guards, real pros, not street thugs. Take out the trash, Arthur commanded calmly. The head of security walked up to Gary. The police are already on their way, Mr. Gary. We have recordings of your threats, extortion, and... By the way, we also sent your file regarding illegal gambling to the prosecutor. The reporter Gary brought had been filming the whole time, but now he realized the scoop wasn't old man buys girl, but mysterious billionaire turns out to be a young hunk and saves wife from tyrant father. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling, a few words for the press, he shouted. Arthur looked at Helen. What do you say, darling? Shall we give them an exclusive? Helen looked at her husband, at the real Arthur. Just one. She pulled him close and kissed him. This time, for real. The camera captured the moment, and an hour later, the photo was on every news outlet with the headline, The Love That Broke the Curse. 6 months passed. Gary got 10 years in prison for extortion and fraud. Helen and Arthur had a real wedding, lavish, beautiful, with music. Helen played her violin, and Arthur looked at her the way you only look at the most precious treasure in the world. They started a foundation to help young musicians facing difficult situations. Arthur was looking for a love that sees deeper than appearances. Helen was looking for salvation, but found a soulmate. Sometimes life wraps a gift in the ugliest packaging, but inside, a real treasure might be hiding. The main thing is having the courage to see the essence. What would you have done in Helen's place? Would you forgive Arthur for the disguised lie? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Next time, I'll tell you the story about a nanny who found out that the child she's watching is actually, well, you'll find out in the next video. Bye.